Hello and welcome to Uzreport World News. My name is Barno Nazarzoda. President Shavkat Mirziyoyev at a meeting on Monday instructed the Justice Ministry to introduce a new system of effective execution of decrees. During his address to the Parliament on December 29, Mirziyoyev urged to ensure timely and effective implementation of the adopted documents.
Over the past 4 years, about 2,000 decrees and resolutions of the President were adopted, but their implementation in regions and organizations remains unsatisfactory. With this in mind, Mirziyoyev ordered to create a new effective execution system comprised of 4 stages. These include planning execution at the draft stage, organizing and facilitating, evaluating and monitoring the execution. The adopted documents are to be focused on the interests of the people, so they need to be brought to the general public. Therefore, the most effective means of monitoring the implementation of decisions are public participation and public control. Thereby, it is necessary to involve the civil society institutions, the media, and citizens in the consideration process of the bills. It is planned to launch a mobile application that will allow individuals and legal entities to send their appeals on the execution of acts of the President.
The Uzbek government unveiled on Monday the draft 2021 state program. The document proposes abolishing the monopoly over gas and electricity supply. The country's authorities intend to allow local companies to buy electricity and liquefied petroleum gas on the open market, rather than from state monopolies in the face of domestic energy shortages.
Uzbekistan exports natural gas mainly to China, but this winter it experienced a shortage of fuel, which caused a reduction in export supplies and discontent among the population. According to the draft presidential decree published on Monday, the state monopoly on the supply of electricity and liquefied gas to local enterprises will be abolished already this year. The draft also proposes cancellation of customs duties and permits for the import of the liquefied gas. The Uzbek Ministry of Energy will be tasked with overseeing the implementation of the roadmap and allow enterprises to import electricity and gas from August 1st, the draft document said. In the meantime, according to the experts, the government's efforts to abolish monopoly on the electricity market would destroy the entire energy system of the country. 2 new players will appear in the producer-consumer chain with their own turnover taxes, costs, and profits, which would lead to a surge in energy prices. Meanwhile, the Energy Ministry said these reforms aim at minimizing the burden on the taxpayers and to put that burden on the private shoulders.
We're doing very high-scale reforms in the power sector, which the intention of which is to minimize the burden on taxpayers and on the government finances, and to put that burden on the private shoulders. These kind of reforms have been done in many countries across the world, and they have been found to be very successful, and that's the reason why they were offered to us, to our government, to be carried out. This will lead to the intention of the reforms is not to let the increase in the sovereign debt, because our infrastructure is old. We need a lot of investments into the sector. According to rough estimates, from 15 billion to 20 billion United States dollars would be needed in the next 10 years, which would increase our debt burden significantly from the current estimate of 30 billion to up to 50 billion. That's huge increase. And in order not to let this happen, we're doing these reforms. And I was very sad to discover that some quasi-experts find these reforms to be devastating to the sector, that they would lead to the increase of tariffs. These assertions, these kind of claims are totally baseless. Why? Because we are conducting selection by the private power producers, for example. They will be brought on competitive basis. Their tariffs are on a competitive basis, very similar to the ones that are state-owned power production companies are having currently. And if before the split up of Uzbekistan, the tariffs were calculated on aggregate level, but this aggregate was done by bringing together the tariffs for each circle. You know, for example, first the tariff for power production would be calculated, then for the transmission, then for the distribution. And currently, after the split up, each sector is calculating their tariffs. So the summing up of the components will not bring something bigger. Saying that this kind of split up will lead to the increase in tariffs is baseless. Another thing that I read, it was claimed that the taxes on revenue would lead to increase in tariffs. But this is taxes on revenue have been abolished. We don't have any taxes on revenue. So this kind of thing will not be experienced, will not be observed in the future when we carry out these reforms. As you know, we split up Uzbekistan into three companies, actually four companies. It's Uzhydro and thermal power plants shareholding companies, and then National Electric Grids of Uzbekistan and Regional Electric Grids. This is to the power production, to the transmission, and to the distribution. So private investors will be brought to the power production, and we will have wholesale market, and then we will not be having intermediaries in the market. There will be producers and there will be retailers. Retailers are companies that will be buying power in the wholesale market and competing in the consumer to deliver this power to the consumers and to the companies, the businesses. So some of the components will not bring to something higher. The tariff, we don't expect the tariffs to be to increase substantially. We don't expect that.
According to the State Statistics Committee, gas production in Uzbekistan decreased by 18.6% to 44.9 billion cubic meters in January-November 2020.
The same draft provides for extension of a moratorium on cutting down valuable trees and shrubs until the end of 2021. The draft proposes introducing a compensation for each felled tree. Thus, a person who violates the moratorium and cuts shrubs will have to plant 10 large seedlings. The seedlings must be at least 5 years old and at least 2 meters high. For illegally tree cuts, it is proposed to plant 100 seedlings. In 2020, gold prices surged 30%, mainly amid the pandemic. Experts expect more moderate growth this year. Moreover, they say a decline in gold prices on the world market doesn't mean a consequent decline in Uzbekistan, as the country compensates the rising rate with a surging exchange rate of US dollar.
The World Gold Council has published a study on the demand for gold from international exchange-traded funds. At the end of 2020, investments increased by a third and reached record values at 3.75 thousand tons. Investors actively increased their investments in gold due to the coronavirus pandemic. International investors invested $6.4 billion in gold in the first quarter, $30 billion in the second, and $21 billion in the third.
I think for individual investor, no any asset doesn't play a role as gold, because in Uzbekistan there is still high inflation. Investing in gold allows to keep the base cost of the investment and become a savings account holder with less risks.
Uzbekistan, in cooperation with Global Alliance for Vaccines and Immunization, is intending to import 100,000 doses of the Comirnaty coronavirus vaccine produced by the American company Pfizer and the German BioNTech. This was announced by the Chief of Sanitary Epidemiological Well-being and Public Health, Bahodir Yusupaliyev. He said the country will receive the vaccine under the COVAX program.
This vaccine needs to be stored at 70 degrees Celsius. According to the Ministry of Health, the country has refrigerators that maintain this temperature, and now work has begun on carefully planning the vaccination process against coronavirus and training medical personnel. To prepare for the vaccination process, the Global Alliance for Vaccines and Immunization provided Uzbekistan with 17 large-capacity refrigerators and 206 minivans. Uzbekistan joined COVAX in August. The program aims at equal distribution of the licensed vaccine among all its participants.
Uzbekistan may soon approve a new draft bill aimed at improving a procedure of granting citizenship to stateless persons. This is stated in the draft 2021 state program. According to the draft starting from May the 1st, 2021, stateless persons who came to Uzbekistan before January the 1st, 2005 and permanently resided in the republic based on a permit for 15 years may be granted citizenship if they wish for such. Uzbekistan has lost 14 positions in the safety rating of the Numbeo International Database. The Numbeo Index is calculated as follows. 100 points are distributed according to the level of crime and safety in the country. The lower the score in the crime index, the higher the score in the safety index, and vice versa.
In 2021, the crime index of Uzbekistan was 34.70 points, with the safety index staying at 65.30 points. With these indicators, the country ranked 40th in the world in terms of security, falling by 14 positions compared to the middle of 2020. According to the crime rate, Uzbekistan ranked 96th in the world, 25th in Asia, and 3rd in Central Asia. Kazakhstan was ranked 39th, Kyrgyzstan 34th. In terms of safety, Uzbekistan was recognized as the safest country in Central Asia, ranked 40th in the world. Kazakhstan was ranked 97th, Kyrgyzstan 101st. The top 5 countries with the highest crime rate were Venezuela, Papua New Guinea, South Africa, Afghanistan, and Honduras. The safest countries in the world with a low crime rate were Qatar, Taiwan, the United Arab Emirates, Oman, and the Isle of Man.
Uzbekistan budget has received some $11 million from the permit for car tinting in 2020. Interior Ministry issued over 50,000 permits during the reporting period. Tinting fees were decreased on October 10, 2020. More than $5 million had been paid by the drivers during October-December alone. Tinting was banned until August 5, 2019. The budget has seen around $29 million since the ban was lifted. Among Central Asian states, car tinting permits are also granted on a paid basis in Kyrgyzstan and Tajikistan. Uzbekistan is intending to introduce a mechanism for voluntary accreditation of medical organizations starting from January 1, 2022, the Minister of Justice said. According to the information, the Minister of Health of Uzbekistan is considered the authorized state body for the accreditation of medical organizations and certification of health experts. The resolution approved the administrative regulations for the provision of public services for the voluntary accreditation of medical organizations. To pass accreditation, medical organizations submit the application to the accrediting body through public service centers and the Unified Portal of Interactive Public Services. The application must be accompanied by receipts for payment of the fee in 2 times the amount of basic calculated value, which is around $42.
Some of the world's top tennis players, including number 1 Novak Djokovic, have questioned Australia's strict quarantine rules ahead of the Australian Open tournament that kicks off next month. But Australian authorities again echoed their earlier stance that the rules would not be bent for anyone. More than 70 players and their entourages are confined to their hotel rooms after passengers on 3 charter flights tested positive for the coronavirus. On the top of the list for requests, players demanded that they should be allowed to train on tennis courts during their mandatory 14-day hotel quarantine. On Tuesday, Victorian Premier Daniel Andrews said the answer was simply no. Tournament director Craig Tilley spoke to the players on a call Monday night to smooth over their concerns.
On that call, there were about 500 players, and the vast majority are happy to be here, pleased to be here, and really getting ready in the next 2 weeks to be able to get out and play the leading events and then play the Australian Open on February the 8th.
Meanwhile, in neighbouring state New South Wales, Hollywood actor Matt Damon was granted an exemption from hotel quarantine after arriving in Sydney to film a sequel to the superhero film Thor. Damon flew in on a private jet and will stay in a rented house under security and pay for hospital-grade cleaning for his 14-day quarantine. That's according to a doctor involved with his quarantine who spoke to local media. Australia questioned how the government could make room for 1,200 tennis players and their entourages for next month's Australian Open, but not its own citizens who are stranded overseas due to the coronavirus pandemic. The country has halved the number of people who can return to the country each week as positive coronavirus cases in hotel quarantine rise.
Guatemalan security forces on Monday cleared a road of hundreds of migrants in a caravan bound for the United States. After an intense standoff overnight, during which police used sticks to try to beat back the mostly Honduran migrant group. The clash Sunday night was the latest effort by Guatemalan authorities to break up the caravan, which officials said numbered close to 8,000 people within hours of its departure for the U.S. from Honduras last week. About 2,000 of the migrants installed themselves on the road after they clashed with Guatemalan security forces during a failed effort to make their way past. The Guatemalan government said groups of migrants looked for alternative routes after the clearance. It was unclear how many were turning back altogether. The migrants included families with young children. Many say they are fleeing poverty and lawlessness in a region rocked by the coronavirus pandemic and 2 hurricanes in November. The first migrant caravan of the year comes just days before the inauguration of U.S. President-elect Joe Biden, who promised to adopt a more humane approach to migration than outgoing President Donald Trump, who favored a hardline approach. Mexican President Andrés Manuel López Obrador on Monday warned migrants not to try to enter countries by force and said he was in touch with both the outgoing and incoming U.S. administrations over the migrant caravan.
For some countries, it's a time to celebrate. This was a 54-year-old nurse in Sao Paulo. She became the first person to be vaccinated in Brazil. But in other parts of the world, few are being inoculated. The head of the World Health Organization is urging countries and manufacturers to spread doses more fairly around the world, criticizing what he called a me-first approach, leaving the world's poorest and most vulnerable at risk.
I need to be blunt. The world is on the brink of a catastrophic moral failure. And the price of this failure will be paid with lives and livelihoods in the world's poorest countries.
Tedros said the prospects for equitable distribution were at serious risk, just as its COVAX vaccine sharing scheme aimed to start distributing inoculations next month.
Even as they speak the language of equitable access, some countries and companies continue to prioritize bilateral deals, going around COVAX, driving up prices, and attempting to jump to the front of the queue. This is wrong. 44 bilateral deals were signed last year, and at least 12 have already been signed this year.
He warns these deals would create the scenario COVAX hoped to avoid, with hoarding, a chaotic market, an uncoordinated response, and continued social and economic disruption. The global scramble for shots has intensified as more infectious various variants circulate. Tedros said more than 39 million vaccine doses had been administered in 49 higher-income countries. Just 25 had been given in one poor country.
Donald Trump has ordered US agencies to assess the risks posed by Chinese-made drones in government fleets. The executive order requires the bodies to outline steps to mitigate any risks, including the removal of drones from federal service. Last month, the Commerce Department added China's SZ-DJI technology to the US government's economic blacklist. The world's largest maker of drones had no immediate comment on the new executive order. In January last year, the US Interior Department grounded its fleet of about 800 Chinese-made drones. Later in the year, it ordered a halt to any further purchases of such devices. The Department of Homeland Security has also warned US companies on risks from Chinese drones. It says officials have strong concerns that foreign intelligence agencies could be given unfettered access to data from drones.
Among Japan's young sumo wrestlers, 10-year-old Kyuta Kumagai stands out. At 187 pounds, Kyuta is twice the size of other children his age. He's so dominant that he wrestles and defeats boys 5 or 6 years older. Last year, he was crowned the under-10 world champion, beating competition from the UK and Ukraine. A shy boy of few words, Kyuta's motivation is simple.
It is fun to beat people older than me.
The sport of sumo demands dedication. It's popularly regarded as Japan's national sport and goes back 1,500 years. Kyuta trains 6 days a week, either at his local sumo club or lifting weights. He also swims and practices track and field. It also takes food, a lot of food. On an average day, Kyuta will consume up to 4,000 calories, downing a litre of milk and copious amounts of protein. He says steak is his favourite. Kyuta's tough training regime was devised by his father, who says this is all worth it.
I don't think I'm wasting money at all. It's not easy. I have to spend a lot of money and time, but I think it's worth investing. I don't gamble. Instead, I'm betting everything on this.
When it became apparent Kyuta had a special talent for sumo, his father moved the family to Fukugawa in Tokyo. The area is famous for producing wrestlers and is home to the Nomi no Sukune shrine, where the god of sumo is said to reside. Now Kyuta has his sights set on his next goal, reaching the level of Yokozuna, the highest ranking in wrestling, and all the blood and sweat that will entail.
And this was our last report. Thank you for watching, and goodbye.